Good morning. I will call this meeting to order. Welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission. This has been noticed as the time and place for presentation and hearing with respect to time varying rates and an evaluation report that was filed in docket PC44. Our notice was issued back on October 8th, 2021, when we received an evaluation report provided by the Brattle Group, whom we heard from last year with a preliminary check-in. Now that the TOU pilot is concluded after 2 years, we have a wealth of information, and I'm happy to report that there are tremendously positive results associated with the findings that Brattle will share with us today. In terms of run of show, we will have a presentation from the work group leader, followed by a presentation from Brattle, and then the joint utilities, which are comprised of Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, Pepco, and Delmarva Power and Light Company. While these presentations will be lengthy, I would encourage my colleagues to ask questions throughout to the presenters. And we'll also have an opportunity for some questions at the end of today's hearing. At this time, I'll turn it over to the work group leader, Ms. Molly Knoll, for some background and introduction of the Brattle team. Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Knoll.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Molly Knoll, and I'm a Senior Commission Advisor serving as co-leader of the Rate Design Work Group along with David Littell. The work group has met several times since the results of the pilots were filed last October, and parties have been engaged and cooperative and are actively reviewing the current design, current conditions, and how the rate may need to adjust over time. I sincerely hope that we'll be able to provide the Commission with a largely consensus recommendation for a whole-scale TOU rollout in the coming months. I'd really like to thank the stakeholders, Brattle Group, utilities, state agencies for their engagement and participation. This has been a more than 5-year process, and I think this pilot has added important insights to both the national body of TOU research and provided Maryland-specific insights that will improve the success of TOUs in Maryland. The purpose of today's hearing is to allow the joint utilities, Baltimore Gas and Electric, Potomac Electric Power Company, and Delmarva Power and Light Company, to present the results of the TOU pilots. The pilot was designed through a collaborative workgroup process and ran from April 2019 through April of 2021. The results are encouraging in many ways and have also provided some important insights for the work group in transitioning the pilot to a full-scale rollout. Unless the commissioners have any questions for David or I, and David and I are always available to answer any questions you all may have, I will let Dr. Sergici take it from here.
Thank you, Molly. Will I have the sharing privileges?
They've just been passed to you.
Great. I think my colleague, Nick Powers, is also planning to join the call. I see his name. Perfect. Sure. Share, correct. Nick, will you be presenting the slides, or should I go ahead and project the slides? Just go ahead and do it. Can you all see my screen? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we could see your screen.
Perfect.
If you could just expand it though, so it's a full view mode.
Sure.
That looks perfect.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and commissioners. We are very excited to be presenting the end of the pilot evaluation of the PC4 time of use pilots. As Molly indicated, this has been a long but very exciting journey. As I was reading some of the initial pilot design documents, I realized that some of those go back to 2017, and I was shocked to realize that it's been that long since we started this journey. But it's, as I mentioned, it's been a very exciting one. This turned out to be a very well-run pilot, and the results are very encouraging. So we have a lot of interesting results to share with you today. A team of us worked on this project at Brattle Group. myself, my colleague Nick Powers, who's on the call with me today, and our colleague Dr. Ahmed Faruqi, who's been involved throughout the design and evaluation of this pilot. But he retired at the end of last year, as you may all know. So Nick and I are presenting the results today, and we also have two other colleagues, Sai Shetty and ZD Tang, who worked on this report with us. So before going into the PC44 time of use pilot results, I figured I would give some context about time varying rates in general and what kind of results were observed when they were tested elsewhere. We have been tracking the time varying rate pilots and programs across North America and elsewhere over the past decade. And we have a very rich database at this time, consisting of 70 plus pilots and 400 plus treatments, specific tests within those pilots. And when we look at all this data, we see that residential customers respond to time varying rates, and this evidence is pretty strong. And there are different flavors of time varying rates. In this chart that we're looking at, we basically plotted the results from each of these 400 treatments of time varying rates with respect to what type of time varying rate design that was tested. And we say that this looks like a Manhattan skyline because each pilot again has a different rate, time of use, critical peak pricing, peak time rebates, but also each pilot has a different price ratio, peak to off-peak price ratio, which has a really strong impact on the results, and as well as design of the pilots itself is very important. Some of them are very robustly designed, like the PC44 TOU pilot, and some others are not as much. So, but again, the highlight of this chart is that there is very strong evidence that the residential customers respond to time varying rates, and that it's not novelty. This has been tested and proven over and over again that when customers are given the option and the choice, they figure out ways to respond to these rates, and they are most oftentimes very satisfied with these rates. Any questions so far? Like Mr. Chairman indicated, happy to take questions during our presentation.
May I just ask a quick question just as we get started, and this may be in the presentation later, but as you noted, time of use rates are not new. It's something that has been going on, I think you said, for over a decade. And so while we did this pilot, is there anything unique that you were looking for that that makes this a pilot in Maryland, or is it just something we were just trying to see if there was anything Maryland specific to glean from?
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if there was something unique that we were looking for in doing a pilot before we actually, and I want to say relaunch, because we have time of use rates already to a certain degree in Maryland. But anyway, I'd just be interested to know at the beginning what we were, from your standpoint, what were we looking for in this, what we're calling a pilot?
Excellent question. Because oftentimes when we present a slide, people respond, okay, if this has been tested and proven, why are we testing these things over and over again? And this is a really good question. And I'm happy to report that PC44 time of use pilots have tested a lot of innovative and different questions, which really advanced the industry's knowledge on the time varying rates and customers responsive to time varying rates. And in fact, if I could pause on that question for maybe 2 more minutes, because I have an entire slide on the unique features of the PC44 pilot. Again, just to recap, PC44 time of use pilots were introduced, and they are not really a simple repeat of the previous time of use pilots. They provide new evidence, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. These pilots were run by the 3 joint utilities of Maryland, BGE, PEPCO, and DPL, and that they ran for 2 years. to be able to understand the persistence of the impact and customer responsiveness over a longer period of time. The customers began transferring to the rates beginning in April 2019, and the pilot ran through April 2021, and the customers have the option to remain on the rates through April 2022. Again, unless the Commission decides to make these rates a permanent offering, in which case they could continue to stay on the rates. The pilot, again, it's a time of use pilot, and there's a peak period and there's an off-peak period, and these peak and off-peak periods change by seasons. There are 2 seasons. There's a summer season, June 1st through September 30th, and there is the non-summer season, which covers October 1st through May 31st. And in the summer season, the peak periods are hour ending 15 through 19. And in the non-summer season, the peak period is in the morning window, hour ending 7 through 9. And these peak to off-peak ratios, so the peak prices are higher than off-peak prices, and these prices were designed to be cost reflective by the utilities, and the peak to off-peak price ratios range from 4:1 to 6:1, meaning that peak prices are 4 times higher than off-peak prices. And in I think BPL's case, it was the peak price was 6 times higher than the off-peak price. So we did a end of the year 1 analysis for the pilot. It was very encouraging. And then we were kind of holding our breath because COVID happened, and sometimes the novelty wears out and customers do not respond as effectively as before. So we said, okay, let's just see what happens after the year 2. And so this analysis is essentially reports the results from the full pilot, 2 years of data, very rich data, and showing on average how the customers responded to these rates. So this is the timeline of the pilot. What I'm going to highlight is that the customers or the customers started to be rolled into these rates in April of 2019. Throughout the 2 years of the pilot, we covered 2 summer seasons and 2 non-summer seasons, and the customers were on the rates until April 2021. And we carried out the impact evaluation, end of the pilot impact evaluation of October. So there were a lot of activities on the side of the utilities in terms of recruiting and tracking participation and marketing and whatnot. So it was a very busy but productive journey, as we can see from this chart. So now coming to the key question. So why did Maryland test the time of use rate again? And then what did we learn? What unique aspects that the PC44 TOU pilots had? So first of all, this pilot was designed in a collaborative work group setting with various stakeholders over the course of a year. So different concerns and considerations were reflected and debated and resolved in this group led by Molly and David. And as a result of putting together all the great minds and perspectives, the design of the pilot has turned out to be really the most robust out there in terms of statistical precision, as well as taking into account customer experience and customers being able to benefit from these rates. So sometimes TOU rates apply to just the generation, and this has been often the case with the prior time of use pilots. In other words, the peak and off-peak price only apply to the generation component, whereas transmission and distribution rates remain flat. But in this pilot, TOU rates apply to charges for generation, transmission, and distribution, and not just the generation piece. So this means that customers' entire rate is subject to this peak and off-peak construct, which leads to a higher peak to off-peak ratio, but also gives them more opportunities to achieve bill savings, because all of their bill and all of their rate is subject to this peak to off-peak price ratios, and in the case that they are able to shift their usage from peak to off-peak periods, that they can achieve material bill savings under this construct. In the PC44 TOU pilot, there was a sizable differential between peak to off-peak periods. As we mentioned, the peak to off-peak prices ranged from the ratios ranged from 4 to 6 across the 3 joint utilities. So this is also very important. So in many other jurisdictions, when the time of use rates were tested, the price ratios were sometimes very mild. So there were obviously strong ratios like the ones that we're looking at here, but in some places, the ratios were very mild, like 1.5 to 1, nearing 2 to 1. And in those cases, we see very mild impact, if any, because it then doesn't become really customers' worth to take on these rates and change around their usage, because they wouldn't achieve material bill savings as a result of these really mildly differentiated rates. So in the case of PC44 pilots, the customers had really real and material opportunities to achieve bill savings. Another great attribute of the PC44 pilots was that peak periods were relatively short. The summer peak period is 5 hours, and the non-summer peak period is about 3 hours. So this allows customers to respond more easily, and it doesn't become too disruptive to reduce their peak usage and shift some of that usage to the off-peak period. So this really takes into account customer satisfaction and customer experience into account by keeping peak periods relatively short. And I would say one of the most important features of the PC44 pilot is that it separately measured the impact of time of use rates on low and moderate income customers and non-LMI customers by creating a designated treatment cells for these 2 groups. So what does that mean? This means that when we were designing the pilot, we made sure that there were sufficient number of LMI customers represented in the pilot as non-LMI customers. And this allowed us to measure the impacts and responsiveness of the LMI customers with a very strong precision, such that once we get the results from these LMI customers, we wouldn't have any doubt as to whether the impacts are real or not. And this is important because some other pilots, they've also provided some insights about how low and moderate income customers respond to these rates, but that they are oftentimes after the fact analysis. They don't design the pilots making sure that the sufficient number of LMI customers will be included in the pilot. They just design the pilot and look at how many of those customers after the fact ended up being low and moderate income. And oftentimes that number is quite low. And then when that sample is analyzed, the precision of the impacts are not satisfactory. So even though they are able to provide some insights or some results about low income responsiveness, that they are not conclusive. PC44 pilot conclusively show that low and moderate income customers could respond to these rates, and as much as non-LMI customers could, and because it was designed to be able to get that precision. Another feature of the pilot is that it featured a quasi-experimental design, meaning that we and utilities developed randomly selected customer groups and then try to recruit these customer groups into the pilot. So the customers targeted for the pilot or reached out for the pilot, they could voluntarily opt in to the pilot, but only if they were in this originally randomly selected group. But we also need a comparison group to be able to measure the impacts from these treatment customers. So we created a matched control group that are almost similar to these treatment customers in their energy usage habits, zip codes, and several other dimensions that we were able to identify, except that these control customers were not subject to the time of use rates. So this allowed us to be able to get to very precise and measured treatment impacts, and then we could attribute the changes in the peak usages to the prices only and nothing else. So this is a very important element of the pilot, that there was a control group, and then we also use pre and post pilot data for our measurements.
May I ask a question right
Sure.
here?
Sure.
Given one of the reasons I think the work group wants to take this a little slow is for marketing purposes. Could you give me just a little color as to how you went about the recruitment, and specifically, I guess, how you worked to try to persuade them to join the pilot?
Yeah, so I will give my sort of response, but I definitely invite utilities jump in, because they were actually the ones who marketed these rates to the customers. So we knew that the commission envisioned eventually and possibly an opt-in deployment of these rates. So meaning that time of use rates, if offered full scale, would be voluntary rates for the customers. So therefore, we designed the pilot to mimic that kind of a deployment. So that means that even in the pilot, the customers would opt in to the rates. But we didn't really want just the top volunteers, that the people who are most enthusiastic about the rates, to just come and sign up. We still wanted to keep some randomness element in the design. So utilities first came up with a list of eligible customers, and there's an eligibility criteria. And then out of that eligible customers, that they came up with random samples, literally random droves of like 20,000, 30,000 customers. And then they went about in waves to send recruitment letters to these customers that were in those random draws. And then in those letters, basically it clearly describes the purpose of the pilot, the rates that we're going to be on, and what they need to do to be able to achieve bill savings under these rates. And also, again, it's another great feature of this pilot is that it provided a personalized estimate of the customer's potential savings that they could achieve under these rates if they didn't change anything at all, but also a few scenarios. What if they change their peak usage or reduce their peak usage by 5%, 10%? So basically the customer could see this information and make an informed decision about whether to participate or not. So that's essentially how utilities recruited customers. Since this was a pilot, they couldn't do any sort of social media or sort of public broadcast type of recruitment activities, because we didn't want to contaminate our potential control group. That group should not know about this pilot. So the recruitment was really mostly focused on the mails that were sent to these customers. I don't know if Denise or utilities want to chime in and supplement anything I said.
Yes, this is Denise Senecal from PEPCO and Delmarva Power. We did use a variety of channels to educate customers on the pilot, and as Sanam said, to provide them with information on their potential savings if they did in fact reduce their energy use based on their energy use history. We sent letters, we sent postcards, we sent emails, and we also had information available on the website to provide them with tools to better understand how they could save under this rate.
Great, thanks. And so, as I understand from the report, you had a structural winners 2/3. So you identified. Did you market differently to those structural winners, and as differentiate it from the other third?
No, there wasn't any targeting of the customers in this pilot. So those structural winners essentially just basically they turned out to be that way. In other words, like these customers were recruited without any specific targeting. And then when we looked at all the customers who opted into the pilot, and when we looked at their bills under the TOU rates before they change anything about their load profiles, we saw that 2/3 of the customers who opted into the rate would automatically win under the time of use rates because of their load profiles. But it wasn't necessarily targeting those customers such that they would participate in the pilot.
Okay, so you ran that analysis after
After.
you looked at the sample. Just out of curiosity, for the utilities, is that a difficult? I mean, could you run a study of all customers and identify who all the potential structural winners are?
We could. I mean, we had information on the structural winners when we sent out the communications, but of course that assumes their energy use patterns from the past are the same in the future. We did not target only structural winners when we sent the letters out. Ultimately, they were the ones who chose to participate in the pilot.
Okay, fair enough. I was just curious for future marketing, if we were to go, the full program, if we could identify, the first tranche would be let's focus all the structural winners. But anyway, I think you answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that we don't necessarily want the structural winners for the pilot. So what I mean by that is that structural winners are the customers who will benefit from these rates, but they are winning under these rates is because they are not necessarily peaky. So we would actually want the peaky customers to be interested in the pilot more so than the structural winners. So I don't think that necessarily targeting the structural winners is perhaps what needs to be done, but that in most opt-in pilots, it turns out to be the case that if the customers understand these rates, most customers are those structural winners. And sometimes the concern is that, okay, are we signing up a bunch of people who would get on these rates, automatically achieve bill savings, but not do anything at all? So that's been a concern. But again, this pilot conclusively showed that those structural pilots did not just rest on their laurels. They, even though they were winning to begin with, they still changed things around and reduced their peak usage, and they responded as much as non-structural winners. So I think
I wasn't. This wasn't a critique of your report.
Oh, no.
I was just trying to glean information for a potential future program. That's
absolutely.
all. So
Absolutely.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Richard, this is Beverly Sikora for BGE. The utilities do, going forward, we didn't have it at the time of the pilot, but both PHI and BGE have rate calculators on our websites now, where our rates are for the different schedules can be kind of are loaded into this calculator, and customers can put in usage amounts and then see what the what their bill impacts would be. So going forward, customers would have the ability to kind of mess with, for lack of a better word, their usage to see, well, if I changed it this, if I did that, the rates would already be in there, so they could kind of get those reports on their own.
Great, thank you.
Right. Yeah, but a great question though. I mean, I think targeting is a very important concept, and when you do deploy these rates on a full scale, utilities have a lot more tools at their disposal to target certain customers more effectively than others. So last but least, another unique attribute of the PC44 TOU pilots is that the customers could get weekly behavioral load shaping BLS messages to reinforce the price signal. So this is Oracle's solution to be able to supplement these time of use programs such that the customer's journey is going to be more informed, so that they would get the feedback on how they are performing, what are the things that they could do to achieve higher bill savings. So it's essentially keeping them engaged in the pilot, as well as giving them feedback about their performance, so that the treatment customers have been getting these weekly emails and messages to help them throughout the pilot period. So this has also been a unique attribute of the pilot. So in terms of the recruitment overview, opt-in rates ranged from 0.5% to 1.9% across the 3 utilities. As we indicated, the savers without load shift, or as we call them, structural winners, were somewhat more likely to enroll than non-savers. So their enrollment rates were in the range of 0.8 to 2%. And again, interestingly, across all 3 utilities, the share of LMI and non-LMI structural winners were about 2/3, meaning that their structural winners were more likely to participate in this pilot.
And Doctor, just one quick question in terms of recruitment. Is it correct that customers that were on a retail supply contract were prohibited from participating in the pilot?
That's correct. Thanks for reminding us that one. This pilot was targeted to default supply customers only.
Okay, thank you. I oftentimes find that retail or utility customers that exercise the ability to choose their supplier are sometimes more, I don't want to say more sophisticated, but more interested in controlling their energy usage, choosing who supplies their gas under what terms. And those are the folks that oftentimes may be interested in diving into the details of what a pilot would look like. So thank you for confirming that. I remember that from a few years ago. So thank you.
No, it's very much true, because there's something about those customers who made them switch to a retail supplier in the first place. So that correlates pretty strongly with their willingness to try out these rates. And in retail competition states like Texas, different time varying rates are being offered by retail suppliers. And I believe there is another pilot going on with one of the retail suppliers in Maryland who is testing a flavor of a time varying rate. But for our purposes, all of these customers are default supplier customers. All right, so as another area is as important as recruitment is the attrition, because sometimes, you know, we created or we designed these sample sizes for each of the utilities treatments to be statistically significant in the first place, and we also included some headroom, assuming that there could be some attrition throughout the 2 years. You know, customers may change their minds, they may move, they may go to retail suppliers, or there are all kinds of reasons why they may want to drop out of this pilot. But we had not envisioned COVID when we were designing these pilot sizes. So when COVID hit, you know, I was just really worried about the attrition rates. You know, my scenario was that, you know, maybe we could lose half of the pilot customers because people were spending a lot of time at home, and you know, schools are closed. So, you know, I was thinking that maybe people would just not want to deal with time of use rates on top of that. But my worst nightmares have not turned out to be true. And in fact, attrition in the second year of the pilot was even lower than the first year. So overall, we lost about 21 to 30% of the enrolled customers between the start and the end of the pilot. And then most of the attrition was due to customers either moving or switching to the other suppliers rather than returning to a flat rate default service. Yes, some customers decided that time of use rates were not for them. But again, majority of the customers that we lost during the pilot we lost them because they either moved or switched to the other suppliers. But again, it was a pleasant surprise that despite COVID, the customers continue to stay on these rates. And then, as we will see in a little bit, they continue to change their usage in responding to these rates, achieving peak savings.
So, just a quick question on that.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen other pilots during that also attempted to operate during the COVID period that had a experience that was not the same as this, where they actually lost customers, and not just in pilots, but in other programs as well. So as part of your review, did you look at reasons why customers remained in this pilot, even during a time when their usage patterns might have changed and could have actually switched back to their normal service as opposed to sticking with the pilot?
So yes, I know that utilities have been tracking the reason for attrition for each customer. So maybe I could turn that question to the utilities. But one thing that I'm going to mention is that, oftentimes it's not really the drastic changes that are needed to deal with these rates. It's, remembering, small things like not to do intensive amount of electricity requiring activities like doing the laundry and the cooking and drying and toaster. If your customer can remember not to work all these devices at once during that 5-hour window, or maybe preheating or pre-cooling or post-cooling. So those little things, they get most customers to achieve bill savings. So my hypothesis, again, I don't have the data to prove this, is that my hypothesis that the customers realize that it wasn't really too disruptive or too difficult to make those small changes in their lifestyles, and they were able to then get the feedback that they were saving some money, and they remained on the rates. Again, this is my hypothesis. I wonder if utilities have heard anything more different or interesting.
Yes, this is Denise Senecal from Pepco and Delmarva again. So we did hear from customers that it was more difficult during the pandemic, but by and large, customers, decided to stay on the pilot and work through the issues that they had. It was primarily families with children who mentioned that they were having they had some difficulties during the last year of the pilot. We also did do a lot of messaging to customers, reminding them of the aspects that Sana mentioned, such as pre-cooling, avoiding the use of, washers and dryers and things like that. So those behavioral aspects were in place, before the pandemic. And so, it was really a function of having their family maybe home earlier for dinner or around in the afternoon that would have made the difference.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Can I just ask one additional question about the surveying? I believe somewhere else in the report it says that the majority, a large majority, had a positive experience with the pilot. Did the polling include the 21 to 29% of the customers that left before the pilot was concluded?
PHI did survey some of the customers who left the pilot. But again, most of the customers who left the pilot did so because they were moving out of the area or moving to a new home within the service territory. So there were very few customers who actually left the pilot because of those difficulties with paying attention to their energy use in that fashion.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I take this slide as a great success, that most of the attrition is due to moving. I was just curious if those who left early also had a chance to do like an exit interview of some kind or an exit polling. So thank you.
Yeah.
So we're right about to start to show you some results, but our evaluation, measurement, and verification analysis involves multiple cuts at the results. So we had such rich data. So it was a dream of data scientists, hourly consumption data for, about, 5,000 customers over 2 years. And we really put the most sophisticated econometric skills, econometric methods in place to be able to quantify as many interesting results and questions as possible. So, and during our analysis throughout, we used this concept of difference in difference econometric model, which accounts for persistent unobservable differences between pilot customers and control groups, meaning that, we know that control customers are kind of imperfect body twins or proxies for a treatment customer, because the best option would be that very customer observed when they are not on the time varying rates, but we don't get to observe that counterfactual case. So the best way we could do was to come up with a matched control group. But even then, what we've done is, we also normalize the changes in the usages of control and pilot customers by looking at their usages before the pilot and after the pilot. So for instance, if economy was getting worse and if people were starting to conserve energy because they were worried about economic security, then that impact would apply to the control group customers as well. So then when we found an impact for the pilot customers, we knew that some of that impact was due to the change in the economy. So we kind of netted out that effect because we've also observed it on the control group customers. So that the sophistication of looking at both treatment and control customers, but also tracking them before and after the pilot period began, gave us really highly reliable pilot results. As I mentioned, we use this approach called match control group to ensure that treatment and control customers are very similar in terms of their observable characteristics, such as their before pilot load profiles, utility engagement, their participation in various utility programs, so that we did our best to be able to match these control groups treatment group customers.
If I could just interject here for a second.
Absolutely.
So this actually relates back to a question that Chairman Stanek asked a few moments ago. So with respect to customers who had chosen a third-party supplier being more willing to kind of engage with their utility bill in some respect, and just being more interested more generally, we found that controlling for previous utility engagement was an important factor in ensuring kind of as close a match as we possibly could between default supplier customers who chose to enroll, who had the option to enroll and did, and those who didn't. There was a very high correlation with previous engagement with other utility programs in predicting signing up for the utility for the pilot.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so if a customer signed up for an energy efficiency program, that they were more likely to sign up for this TOU rate is what we found, and use it as a proxy to match the control group customers to treatment customers. And so we also looked at the results by summer and non-summer seasons. We estimated, so in addition to estimating the actual impact, so you'll see that we estimated, let's say the peak reduction was 5% or 8%. We also quantified the degree to which customers are responding to these price signals, and they are called elasticities. So we quantified the substitution and daily price elasticities for pilot participants, which will then allow us to figure out if in the future, utilities want to offer rates with different ratios, then then we will be able to use these price elasticities to estimate what kind of impacts can be expected based on different price ratios. So that's really one of the biggest advantages of running a pilot in a given jurisdiction before deploying a full-scale program, because you understand your customers' price elasticity, their willingness to respond, and then if you choose to test other rates, then you could then estimate what those impacts might be like. And then we've also looked at the persistence of the impact between years 1 and year 2, whether the year 2 impacts were lower or higher or the same as year 1, and that we looked at the impacts for various subgroups, such as whether the customers under the net metering arrangement are more responsive or less responsive, whether the lower usage customers or higher usage customers are more responsive or not, whether the structural winners are more responsive compared to the other customers. So we basically created various subgroups of customers based on their attributes, and then try to quantify those impacts to the extent that there was sufficient data. And last but not least, we also undertook an assessment of the bill impact. On average, we figured out what % of bill saving these pilot customers achieved during the course of the 2 years. So after this long introduction of the pilot, so we're going to now show you some results, and I'll turn this over to my colleague, Nick. He's going to walk us through the summer and non-summer results that we observed from the pilot.
Okay, thank you, Sanam, and thank you to the Commission for the chance to present these results. We spent a lot of time with this data over the past several years, and it's exciting to see the pilot come to its close and have some interesting results to report on. So beginning with the summer weekday peak impacts, what we found is that customers who enrolled in the pilot reduced their peak load relative to our control group, our matched control group, in a rather significant way. So our LMI customers reduced their load impacts, reduced their peak load by anywhere from 7.5% to 14.5% across the 3 utilities. Non-LMI customers had similar impacts in the range of 10.9 to 15.1%, which means that kind of all pilot customers as a whole, or essentially a weighted average of that, falling in between 9.3 and 13.7%. Now, one thing to note here is that although we call the point estimates, which is kind of our average impact, the numbers are slightly different between, say, for example, BGE's LMI customers at 7.5% and BGE's non-LMI customers at 10.9%. Those differences are not large enough for us to make any strong conclusions that LMI customers saw less of an impact than non-LMI customers. That's kind of within the noise of the data, if you will. So we say there's not a statistically significant difference between the LMI and non-LMI groups in any of the 3 utilities.
Dr. Powers, can I ask you a question on your bar chart here?
Please.
It looks like DPL is on there 3 times, but there's only 2 really. Are they all on there 3 times, or am I looking at that wrong? Oh,
they
all on there.
They are. So there's 3 panels, and
Okay,
thank you for the question, the chance to clarify. So the leftmost panel has each of the 3 utilities focusing just on the LMI customers. The central panel has, again, all 3 utilities, but focusing just on the non-LMI customers. And the rightmost panel is essentially the average. It's kind of, if we look at all treatment customers as a whole.
I see it now. Thank you.
And throughout the
Could I ask a
presentation,
question?
we will use the same color code. So BGE is the teal, PEPCO is green, and DPL is yellow. So you'll see this chart over and over again in the remaining slides. Sorry, that was a question.
Yeah, just one question. I think in an earlier review, one of the findings is that there was also energy savings or reduction in energy usage overall of the customers. I don't know if there's another slide that discusses that, but is that the next one? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was just interested in that finding. Also, before we go, is there any kind of a explanation why there was, a fairly big difference between the utility in how the peak energy was reduced between the utilities. It just seemed like there was a lot of variation, which kind of struck me as odd for Maryland being a fairly compact, small state.
So we haven't done a systematic analysis of that. There are differences across the three utilities in the price ratios, the peak to off-peak price ratios that were used in the pilots, and so that's one possible explanation. I think there's also just enough weather difference between, say, DPL and BGI and PEPCO that may have had something to do with it. Maybe residents in DPL are a little less reliant on their air conditioning during those hottest summer days. But your question also sets up our nice next slide nicely here. So, and just to provide a little bit of explanation here. So, when we see load reductions during peak hours, there's two possibilities. That energy could just be pure conservation, and that it's energy that the customer realizes they didn't really need to spend, really didn't need to consume. Or it may be that there's some shifting. Sanam referenced earlier the possibility that someone would do their laundry in the middle of the night instead of 4 p.m. on a summer day, right? And so what we also took a look at here is the weekday off-peak impacts. And so typically what we expect if you're facing lower prices during your off-peak hours than you would under a flat rate, that you might actually consume, all things equal, you might consume a little bit more. We didn't really see that come out in the data. In all three cases here, the results were statistically insignificant. And so it's really hard to make a strong conclusion that that customers had any impact on their off-peak hours. And this may be a function of the BLS tool. We can't say for sure, but with the behavioral load shaping, there may have been kind of just some realization that there's a possibility for conservation as opposed to necessarily needing to push your consumption to the lower price time.
So just so I understand, then the finding at this point, can we have some confidence that, or is there nothing to support that a time of use rate would contribute to some of our state's energy efficiency programs, such as Empower? Can we say time of use does contribute, or an inconclusive?
So let me clarify for a moment, just because I was focusing here on the left panel, and the left panel is the off-peak impacts. To look at the total conservation impacts, we need to look at kind of the sum, a weighted average of the peak and the off-peak impacts, and so that's what's on the rightmost panel. So while we don't see an increase in off-peak consumption, we see essentially no effect on the off-peak during weekdays. We do see, because there's these large peak reductions coupled with no off-peak impacts, significant impacts in both PEPCO and DPL. So a 3% reduction in overall energy conservation, energy use during weekdays, and 4.6% at DPL, a 4.6 reduction in overall electricity consumption.
And
Let me ask a question there, follow up.
Please go ahead, Commissioner.
I wanted to ask, focusing on the chart on the right, were there differences in the messaging techniques, the behavioral load shaping messages, the weeklies between the utilities, and could that have affected the variance between, say, BG&E and DPL or the PHI companies?
My understanding is that the behavioral load shaping messaging was very similar, if not identical, across the three utilities.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I was just going to say that this was a very surprising result for us, because oftentimes time of use programs or most time varying rates, they are introduced for load shifting benefits without much expectation for conservation. In some of our past work, we have seen very little conservation, if any, from time of use rates. So we were very surprised, pleasantly surprised to see that the customers were achieving conservation here in the context of the time of use rate. And again, our hypothesis is that that's potentially due to the BLS tool, since they were getting these messages week after week. And even though the BLS tool was kind of emphasizing load shifting, maybe that's also engaged customers in the conservation mindset, and that led to achieving these conservation benefits from the time of use rates.
Okay. Again, so just, man, I'm sorry to keep asking this question over and over again.
No,
Maybe I can
that's
ask
great.
it
No,
better this what time. I mean, would we be on sound footing to say that time of use tariffs could be a part of our suite of Empower programs, our energy efficiency programs?
so maybe we should look at the non-summer impacts as well, because the conservation from the non-summer months, I don't think those impacts are statistically significant. So I don't think that we can conclusively say that time of use can become part of the TOU Empower portfolio, or if at all, if it will be, I think we may need to apply some conservatism to the numbers that are coming out of the pilots, because like I have to admit, this was surprising that these impacts were really as high as they were. So there's got to be some sort of a derating of these conservation impacts if they will become part of the Empower portfolio, my opinion.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that direct answer.
Okay. So one of the benefits of having a 2-year pilot is that we were able to, or the foreseen benefits was being able to learn something about how the impacts evolved over time. So typically, in the pre-pilot period, we had two expectations of two major impacts on this. That you might have some kind of fatigue, where initially somebody signs up for the time of use rate. It's new and it's exciting, and then after a while, people just get kind of tired of thinking so hard about when they turn their air conditioning on, when they run their laundry, things like that. Another possibility is that people get better at it over time, right? They learn more about it. They understand that, well, actually, it's not so bad to just have the house 2 degrees warmer during the hottest hours of the day, and what I do is pre-cool or what have you. There's could be some behavioral changes over time. What we didn't foresee, of course, was COVID, and as Sanam mentioned, in March 2020, when this was all unfolding, we all were concerned, A, that there'd be mass attrition, but B, if there wasn't, that the impacts would kind of vanish as people were spending more hours at home and just felt like they really wanted their air conditioning on, for example. So that's why here in this slide, we're presenting the results of testing for differences between years 1 and 2. And the width of our chart here with all the different bars has now doubled because we've got, for each panel, we've got a year 1 and year 2 result next to each other. And broadly speaking, the pilot impacts were very similar in the first and second summers. So of course, there were changes to the overall load shape, which we've got some charts on later on that we can show you. But again, what we're doing here is looking for, I'll refer back to Sanam's discussion before about the differences in differences technique. So yes, there were changes for all customers between year 1 and year 2, but the pilot customers were able to continue to reduce load relative to the pre-pilot period.
Question?
Sure, go ahead.
It looks like there's a pretty significant, just a little under 50% decrease between year 1 and year 2 in DPL non-LMI customers.
Yes.
Was the attrition rate for DPL non-LMI customers at the high end, the 29% end of the range of attrition? Was it an outlier at the high end, or could that have affected that dramatic decrease?
So I've just flipped back a few slides here on my computer here, and DPL actually had some of the lower attrition during that second year. Which may be related here, that maybe the in some places, the customers who were committed to it really stuck with it, but in DPL, some customers who, well, I'd be speculating to say, but perhaps there was some, some customers who stuck on, but stopped working so hard at it. But in any case, what you've set up here is the exception, right? So DPL's non-LMI customers, they are the sole group where we see a significant change, the sole subgroup where we see a significant change. So we had a 16.5% effect in the first year that fell to an 8.5% in the second year. And the variance, so these kind of bars here represent kind of the error around that. And the variance became so wide that the result became insignificant in the second year. And so that's why this bar is shaded gray. And so when we turn to the all DPL customers, we also see a significant difference. We see a drop from 16.3 to 11.2%, although it remains significant when we're looking at all customers.
Right, and so there is.
For the other 5 customer groups, we didn't see a significant difference.
Nick, this is commissioners. This is Michael Norman from PHI. The one takeaway I did have too is for DPL particularly is, it was reassuring to see the LMI group was still able to conserve and that they still had a reduction. Even though the non-LMI group, as Nick explained, we got that gray bar in year 2, but the LMI group still was saving.
Right, and I also want to add that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I also want to add that we started with a lower number of customers for the DPL. It was more difficult to recruit sufficiently large sample size for DPL to begin with, and then even though attrition was not much more different or higher for DPL, as we kept losing customers, all of a sudden we are left with a very small sample for non-LMI customers with DPL. I mean, if you look at the number, we have about 197 customers that we are conducting this analysis on, compared to the other utilities. PEPCO is 563 and 663 for PEPCO. So as the sample size goes lower, which is now getting to be a critically low stage for DPL, that we're getting a lot more noise in the results. So some of this gray bar phenomenon and the impact being so low is also an artifact of not having a sufficient number of customers at this time to have the same precision and reliability of the results for DPL, for non-LMI.
Thank you. That's all very helpful.
Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, we can kind of wrap up our summer results here and just kind of restating what we found in the last 3 or 4 slides here. The peak impacts were material in the summers. The LMI customer peak impact was also sizable, and broadly speaking, we don't see a difference between the impact that LMI customers enjoyed and those that non-LMI customers enjoyed. Unlike in previous pilots, we don't see much evidence of load shifting where customers are increasing their off-peak load, but that may be related to the behavioral messaging tool, as we mentioned before. There are some evidence that the weekday, the overall conservation, some evidence overall conservation for PEPCO and DPL, and those are statistically significant, and I think between 3 and 4.5% is what we saw. And broadly speaking, we don't see a large drop-off in the effects in year 2, or really much of a change at all, with one exception, and that's DPL's non-LMI customers. Now, in order to be able to port these results to different rates and ratios, we've also estimated substitutional elasticities and daily price elasticities. Those are discussed in 1 or 2 slides here. Those are largely in line with what we see in previous studies. But if we can jump to the next slide there, I think before we get to that, there is a chart that kind of puts these results in perspective. So if you remember, we had kind of the Manhattan skyscraper slide, or maybe it should be the Baltimore skyline slide there early on in the presentation. But this is kind of zooming in on time of use rates. This is a database that Sanam and colleagues have pulled together over the years. And this really puts us right in line of, so if you think of the comparable set of studies as kind of that green line that we've seen in the past. This is peak to off-peak prices, but only a price impact, so not a technology impact where we're sending out devices that would accommodate some load shifting. We're right in the range of where we would be, right around that green line. Sanam, if you could flip to the next slide.
All right.
And again, this is what I was referring to a slide or two previously, that the substitutional elasticities we see are very comparable with what we see elsewhere, between 6 and 9%, and that's kind of in line with this collection of elasticities from previous studies. With respect to demand elasticities, so this is just the extent to which overall consumption goes down in response to a change in the average price faced by a customer, we actually see slightly larger effects here, particularly for DPL. For BGE and PEPCO, it's much more in line with what we've seen previously. Okay, so now I think it would be great to we can flip to the non-summer results here. And so again, non-summer, just for context, that's 8 months of the year. So that covers October 1st through May 31st. So generally a different load profile than we see in the 4 summer months. So slightly, and the peak period here, the peak window is now from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And generally speaking, what we see again is, for the most part, 4 out of 6 groups, we see economically and statistically significant peak load reductions. PEPCO's results of a 3.9% reduction was not statistically significant, although BGEs and DPLs both were. In non-LMI customers, we see a insignificant result for DPL of only a 1.6% reduction, but we see larger effects, 4.3 and 5.8% for the other 2 utilities. And for the combined sample, so this is basically taking all pilot customers as a group, we do see significant effects, statistically significant effects, centered right around the 5% load reduction. So in general, the magnitude of the load reductions here is lower than what we see in the summer, but nevertheless, still significant. Again, we've got a situation here where the LMI impact is not statistically different from that of the non-LMI customers.
Right, and Nick, this is also consistent with what we've seen elsewhere. Typically, non-summer peak impacts are lower than the summer peak impacts, and that's mostly because discretionary load in the non-summer months are less than the summer discretionary load. So this result wasn't surprising to us.
Right. Okay, if there's no questions, we can move on. Turning again to off-peak impacts and conservation impacts. We'll start with off-peak impacts on the left-hand side. Again, we don't really see any statistically significant evidence that customers are increasing their off-peak load in response to the pilot rates. Combining that impact with the relatively smaller peak impacts, we end up with without seeing significant conservation impacts. So in general, what that's consistent with is here we're again seeing shifting of load as opposed to straight up conservation, whereas in the summer there was a mix of the two. We also tested for differences between years 1 and 2. Here it's slightly different. COVID hit in, started to have kind of be felt around the state of Maryland in March of 2020. So And that was actually still within the year one of our non-summer period. Our non-summer period, year one, began in October 19 and went through May 2020. So in some sense, it wasn't full COVID, but it was partially COVID. But again, broadly speaking, for the most part, across 5 of the 6 utility groups, we do not see statistically significant differences in the impacts between year one and year two. Again, the exception is DPL's non-LMI customers, for whom we had observed a significant impact, a large impact of 6.8%, although not statistically significant. And we actually, on average, the load actually increased for the pilot customers. But again, this is a small sample, and it's hard to ascribe too much importance to it. So just recapping what we've just seen, the peak impacts are material, anywhere from 4.3% to 7.7% in the non-summer period. That's roughly consistent with what we've seen in other pilots, both in terms of the magnitude in that period, but also relative to the summer, having slightly smaller magnitudes than we see in the summer. Again, we don't really see a distinguishable difference between the LMI impact and the non-LMI customers' impacts. We don't see much evidence of shifting, really any evidence of shifting to increasing consumption during the lower priced off-peak period. As a result, the energy conservation impacts aren't really detectable there for the 3 utilities. And again, we don't see significant differences in terms of between years 1 and year 2. I think that maybe back to Sanam to wrap us up here.
That's good. Thanks, Nick. And can you hear me fine? Because I feel like I'm having some network connection issues. Does my voice come through?
I hear you great.
Okay, perfect.
Loud and clear.
Great. Okay, so this is our last section. So a few different analysis here in this section. The first one is we wanted to understand the COVID-19 impacts on results, but it's challenging, right? It's very difficult to create that counterfactual. How would customers have behaved had it not been a COVID period? So we can't answer the question. So instead of trying to answer the question, we said, okay, let's look at the load profiles of control customers, because these are the customers who are not on the time varying rate, time of use rate. And then let's see if the load shapes are changing visibly or materially, because it would tell us that, okay, the customers' lifestyle are changing, energy lifestyle are changing because of being at home due to COVID. And then to the extent that we can see different results from the pilot, that we will know that those results are partially because of those changing load shapes or despite those changing load shapes. So that's really the best we could do. And consistent with our expectations, we have seen that because of COVID, the load shapes have changed materially. Again, we're looking at the BGE control customers for this particular slide. And we have 4 months here: April, July, October, and January. And for each month, we have 3 pre-pandemic years, 2018, 19, and 20. And we have 2 pandemic years, 2020 and 2021. And we plot the load shape for that particular month for these 4 to 5 years. And the red lines are the pandemic years. So it's visually clear that in April and in October, the load shapes under the pandemic conditions were flatter. There was more.
Sanam, you cut out again.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, so I was saying that in July, the load shape becomes more peaky because it's the summer month and people are home and heavily using their air conditioning units. So again, the fact that we have seen peak demand reductions consistent with the first year is really encouraging, because despite these changes in the load profiles and underlying energy lifestyle changes, the customers continue to respond to time varying rates. So as we mentioned at the beginning, we had designated sample sizes for low income LMI and non-LMI customers, but we also wanted to divide our data into different subgroups and to see if we can learn other things, like what attributes like net energy metering status, usage level prior to whether a customer is a low or high user, or whether the customer is a structural winner or not, how those attributes affect customers' responsiveness to these rates. And here we're presenting results for non-customers and their comparison to the non-customers, and as well as structural winner analysis. And there's a lot more, I think 2 or 3 more different layers in the report. But essentially what we find is that peak load impacts were different for M customers than for non-M customers. They were higher for BG and PEPCO, but lower for DPL. But the differences were not statistically significant due to the sample sizes. This is, again, expected problem, since we did not size our samples to be able to answer all these questions in a significant way. The insights that we get from these analysis are mostly directional. But the structural winner analysis is obviously an exception. We saw that in most cases, structural winners reduce peak load as much as other enrollees. The 2 exceptions were DPL customers in the summer. They are still weakly statistically significant, and the PEPCO customers in the non-summer months. But to a large extent, structural winners, they reduce their peak usage as much as the other enrollees, and the impacts were not statistically significant. So another important result that we're reporting from the audit is that not only the customers were able to reduce their usages during peak periods, they were able to convert these peak usage reductions into bill savings. Pilot customers enjoyed savings ranging from 2.3% to 9.7%, depending on the utility and year. So these are annual average net savings, and they are net because we are calculating these savings after accounting for changes in the control customer bills. So these are encouraging results. There's the bills increase typically during the summer months, but they decrease a lot more in the non-summer months for the pilot participants generally, such that they still end up ahead and achieving bill savings when we look at on an annual basis. So PEPCO is one exception. PEPCO customers have achieved bill savings in both summer and non-summer months. And I think it was due to a slightly different approach to PEPCO's design of the rates, that they were, I think, designed to be revenue neutral within the season instead of being revenue neutral across the year. So that's why PEPCO results here is a bit different from the BG and DPL results that shows higher bills in the summer months, but much lower bill reductions, much lower bills and higher bill reductions in the non-summer months, resulting net savings on an annual basis. So the first table on the left is showing the bill impact by season for utilities, and the impact on the right, the table on the right-hand side, it's basically showing the bill impact by customer type for each utility and in year. So we see that the savings were generally similar between LMI and non-LMI customers. So if you eyeball the numbers, I know for BGE, LMI customers achieved 6.5% bill reductions, non-LMI customers achieved 4.2%. For PEPCO, LMI customers achieved 8.4%, non-LMI customers 10.9%. So they're usually pretty close. DPL is the one that is have a higher differential between the two. But the bottom line is that both LMI and non-LMI customers ended up achieving bill savings.
And Doctor, just a quick question. I think it's obvious, but just to confirm my understanding, these bill impacts are solely with respect to the commodity, the SOS default supply service?
That's the entire bill for the customers, because the time of use rate, as you know, is applied to both generation, transmission, and distribution. So when we calculated customers' overall bill and then compare that bill under the time of use rates, this is what they were able to save on that overall bill.
Okay, well that's important. I had a misunderstanding there, so that's a much bigger difference. Instead if it was just supply, this is the bottom line for. Okay, thank you.
Exactly, and I think that it's just a lot of information at once here, but so by the virtue of having customers' entire rate on a time of use rate. So first of all, I think utilities were able to create stronger price signals for the customers. It's not just the generation piece, right? If it was the just generation piece and transmission and distribution was flat, then that price signal was going to be diluted when the customer, considered their overall bill. So now they've gotten a very strong price signal, and as a result of that, by responding to that strong price signal, they were able to achieve these bill savings on their entire bill on an annual basis.
So, I thought you said that the non-summer impact of the pilot was they really didn't change their behavior in non-summer. Did I hear that right?
So it's slightly different.
I see nodding, right?
That's right.
That's right. Okay, thanks. So then why on the left side of this slide, why is the bill impact so negative? I'm assuming that means the bill went down. So if their behavior didn't change, why did the bill go down so much in the non-summer months?
So that's partly an artifact of the rate structure. So and also recall that there were only I'm trying to remember. Sonam, do you have any intuition for this?
I figure it doesn't have to do with the rate change between summer and non-summer, because that would have been baked into the pilot, right? So that doesn't seem to me that would make a difference, but perhaps I'm incorrect.
This is Lynn with BGE. So I think it is, at least for us on the BGE side, it is in the way we had to do the rate design. We, on the supply side, the generation and the transmission, we shaped our rates over a full year's worth of billing determinants instead of doing it seasonally. And the reason we had to do that is because there are so few peak hours in the non-summer period, just 3 hours in the morning. There wasn't enough load to spread the cost over. And it generated a really high peak to off-peak ratio in the non-summer and a lower one in the summer. And that was just between the seasons. It was a big change for customers. We weren't really comfortable with that. So we smoothed it over the year to make a more stable peak to off-peak ratio and price signal for customers throughout the year.
So then, in fact, it would be due to the fact that potentially due to the difference between summer and non-summer rates.
That's right.
Okay, all right, yeah, because I was assuming that you already baked in the summer and non-summer, but you're telling me that you did not because of the large change in the incentive, I guess, or the ratio. So, okay, that helps because that was confusing me. Thanks.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. I don't think we could call it an honest day if we didn't have one of these technical difficulties. So I'm back.
No, that's quite all right. I see our co-leader, David Littell. David, did you have something to contribute?
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone, Chairman and Commissioners. I just want to point out, one, it's been a long road. Two, this is a pilot that actually has some really nice results. Not all pilots do, and everyone has been engaged. I just wanted to add to Lynn's answer that I think what she described as a process it speaks to the way that we set these rates that Sonam also touched on earlier. It was really an iterative process back and forth between the work group and the utilities and all of the stakeholders looking at the load curves, looking at the data and coming back to design rates that looked and felt right to the entire group. And then ultimately what we proposed to the commission and went through that as I think 4 years ago now. So it's different than some other jurisdictions in the way they've approached setting time of use rates. We worked off of the existing EV rates, but we modified them and we did it collaboratively as a group, and just wanted to highlight that different process and that for all the jurisdictions I work with and in, this has been a very positive pilot and experience, and that's due to really engagement from all the stakeholders, Brattle, the utilities, and the commissioners, as the questions you've asked today have illustrated. So that's it.
Mr. Chairman, I have some kind of off the beaten path, as my colleagues know, questions. That is my want to do sometimes, but I'm going to ask them anyway. I got 3 of them. Kind of a minor one, but cost recovery for the behavioral load shaping messages for the purposes of the pilot. Weekly messages for BLS over 2 years has to come with some expense, creation, shipping them out, whatever. I mean, I know it's kind of hitting a button for the most part. We still got to develop and take some time, and there's some expense. How will that be recovered? Is it for the purpose of the pilot? Is that amortized or is that expensed? Anybody?
I will jump in. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Molly. I was going to use my recollection, but you may know.
Let's see if our recollections match. My recollection was that the commission had indicated the cost recovery would be considered in a rate case, and I do not believe it was raised in the rate case. So I assume it's simply, being recovered in the background of rates. Okay.
The reason I asked is because we changed our Empower programming to require behavioral programming to be expensed, and I didn't know what we're doing here. So I'll find out later. No problem.
Commissioner O'Donnell, sorry,
yes.
this is John Prane. I just wanted to confirm that these costs are expensed and were, recovered through base rates during the period that they were expensed.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
O'Donnell, this is Michael Norman. That is also true for PHI.
Okay, very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Fiery, the disaggregation pilot that BG&E is engaged in as well as SMECO, but specifically BG&E, is there any cross-pollination between the disaggregation pilot learnings and the learnings from this time of use pilot? In other words, can you take information from the two to even further enrich the learnings from this pilot?
I may have to turn to my colleagues to see if they are familiar. I'm not sure what the disaggregation pilot is or the details of
Okay.
it, so I
I'm sorry,
apologize.
I apologize. I thought you were, so I apologize for directing that question to you. Anybody have any idea or thoughts?
Commissioner O'Donnell, this is John Frayne again. I'm not that familiar with the disaggregation pilot either, but we could certainly get back to you.
Okay. It just seems to me there may be some tie there with regard to what we learn about people's load and when it's there and when it's not, and how time of use rates may be impacted by that. So anyway, just a curiosity on my part. But if you do find anything out, Mr. Frayne, I would appreciate hearing about that. So this goes to the doctors from Brattle. In your opinion, what can the third-party supplier community take away with respect to their offerings from the results and analysis of this time of use pilot, if any?
Yeah, so the commissioner, I think that's a great question. So these rates are definitely innovative, right? And we've seen that the customers are responding to them and they're achieving bill savings. So that's a positive test. That's a positive outcome of this test and the concept. So I think third-party supplier should consider offering these rates to their customers. And this is already being done in places like Texas, that the retail suppliers offering different flavors of time varying rates to attract some customers, free nights, free weekends, certain time windows for certain customers are differentiated. So again, I think as the market matures, as the customers get more informed about these rates, I think that they will demand different options, and the retail suppliers should be prepared to offer similar rates to the shopping customers.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. That's all I had. Thank you.
Commissioner, I'd like to add just one item. In the work group discussions, we are also talking about the ability to pair this rate with third-party supply options, opening up that it wouldn't just have to be an SOS offering. Those discussions are underway, but that issue will be raised when we bring a full rollout proposal.
Good.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knoll. Other commissioners may still have questions, but I'm going to suggest at this point, we're more than an hour and a half in. Let's take a 15-minute break. Then we'll come back and commissioners may have additional questions for Brattle. After those questions are asked, we will turn to the utility presentation, where we'll hear from the first time from the joint utilities. So we will come back at 11:47 a.m. We're in recess until 11:47. All right, we will go back on the record. Do commissioners have additional questions of the Brattle team? Well, it doesn't appear so, but Dr. Powers and Dr. Sergisi, thank you for the presentation today. I hope you can stick around for the remainder of the presentations. At this point, we will turn it over to the utilities, the joint utilities, to share with us their presentation. And if it is possible to maximize the view for our YouTube viewers, that would be appreciated if it's possible.
Good morning. I am sharing my screen, but I can't tell
I
if
think
you
you
can
have
see
to.
it or not.
I think you have to click that little icon on the bottom right. Looks like a square with a stick on it, all the way at the bottom. But if that's not possible, we'll proceed with. Oh, we lost it.
Okay, I just thought I would try it again.
Okay.
So okay, how is this?
It's the same as before, but we'll take this if this is the best we could get.
Yeah, I can't seem to make it go larger.
Okay. It did shift now, so we're only seeing half of it is being cut off. Perhaps if you maximize. All right, there we go. Why don't we stick with that? Thank you.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is go through the survey results for each of the 3 utilities. As you know, we conducted research before and after the pilot ended. And so this is going to talk primarily about the customer feedback from after the pilot ended. We conducted online surveys with our customers. And for Pepco and Delmarva Power, we also conducted some of the interviewing by telephone. So I'm going to go through the overall results first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the key findings. In general, as you've heard, the customers had a very positive view of their pilot experience, with over 9 in 10 customers saying that they were satisfied with their experience on the pilot. They were also highly satisfied with the information that we provided, which included, the weekly emails and the periodic emails during the season to provide them with tips on saving energy use. Customers were also very satisfied with their ability to control their energy use, as well with the savings that they received on their bill. And the vast majority of them said that they plan to stay on the pilot rate in the future. In terms of the expected savings, while some customers couldn't recall exactly how much they wanted to save during the pilot, we found that many customers saved more than $200 And another 1/5 about saved 100 to expected to save $100 to $200 on their bill. So, I would say in general, these customers expected to save a sizable amount of money each year prior to starting the pilot. So we
Could I
did
ask a question on that slide?
Sure.
Those savings, what were these savings per year or savings per seasonal period?
Per year. So this is what their expectations were prior to starting the pilot.
Okay, all right, so this is an annual, so 2-year program, we could effectively double that.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
So we asked customers what type of impact COVID-19 had on their ability to save during the pilot. And as you can see, a large segment of customers said that there was no impact. If there was an impact, though, mostly customers said it was harder to manage their energy use. A few customers said it was easier to manage their energy use, perhaps because they were spending more time in their household, so it was easier for them to shift energy use. When we looked at the customers who said it was harder, as I mentioned earlier, these were typically customers who had larger households, who said that they were home more often during the day due to work and school, and that made it more difficult to shift their schedules. So customers found it, by and large, easier to shift their energy use during the winter time as opposed to the summer. And customers said that it was very easy to shift their energy use during the winter. Some customers were neutral, but they did express that it was more difficult during the summer. And that's not surprising, given the early evening time of the summer hours. We also asked if this rate was offered in the future, whether they'd be interested in having the ability to choose an electric supplier. Many customers were not interested. Many customers said they were unsure. So very few customers for BG&E, only about 1/5, and around 1/3 or more for Pepco and Delmarva Power. So I said we offered them a variety of educational materials. These images are from the Oracle tool that customers received on a weekly basis. Customers felt that these were very helpful, and we saw continued engagement throughout the pilot. So awareness and usage was very high. Customers continued to open them and read them throughout the pilot. Hopefully you can see easily enough what these tools tell them, but they really give them detailed feedback on their performance, showing how much they spent and saved during the prior week and what their usage was during the specific peak hours. The satisfaction level with the other resources was also high, so we would certainly expect to continue offering these types of resources in the future. Customers receive seasonal emails when the peak hours were changing to remind them that it was a different time period. The PEPCO and Delmarva customers also received graphs on their paper bill showing their peak and off-peak usage. BG&E also had graphs with their energy use online and through the app. And we also had website information available with tips on how to save energy as well. And customers did do a variety of things in order to shift energy use, but also save energy, that conservation impact that we saw. So, you know, sometimes depending on the season, it was doing things like, you know, reducing their heating levels by using space heaters, programmable thermostats to help them shift and save, using things like window AC, and then purchasing items such as, you know, smart light bulbs, smart thermostats, and leveraging their personal assistant devices. About half of the customers said they made, about half of the customers said they made some sort of more permanent upgrade or change to their home, including upgrading appliances, new thermostats, upgraded heating and cooling, insulation, and replacing doors and windows. So, you know, I would say it wasn't really a surprise that these customers were, you know, highly motivated to save energy. And so they did pay close attention to their energy use. They had the weekly emails about their performance. And so they tended to be very engaged with looking for products that are good for the environment, and focusing on saving money in addition to saving energy. And customers said that there were a variety of impacts of the pilot in terms of their behaviors and perceptions about energy use. On a personal level, they said that it made them pay more attention to their energy use, and they felt that they were more in more control. And as we saw from the data, it motivated them to save energy overall. In terms of the household, you know, many people cited that, you know, their household was more engaged in saving energy. So families with children, you know, were engaging their children in saving energy use as well, and focus their household more on energy conservation in general. For the future, customers did say that they were interested in making more changes to their home to increase energy efficiency, and that they were interested in participating in programs to reduce their energy use. So the last two slides go through the demographic differences of the customers and a comparison to the general population. So moving back up to the beginning, you know, I think some of the key takeaways that we saw are that, you know, customers had a very positive experience on the pilot. It motivated them to save energy, pushed them to change their usage patterns, and we would expect these behaviors to remain in the future. Customers were typically happy with their savings, and the their ability to shift their energy use and save the amount of money that they had hoped to save at the beginning of the pilot. In terms of the information tools, we would expect those to continue in the future. Customers found them all useful and were engaged with using them throughout the pilot. And finally, just that the customized letters showing customers their potential savings were cited as a key factor in the decision to join the pilot. So customers did report using the customized letters along with the other variety of tools that we provided them with to make their decision. And I think that ultimately, the fact that few customers left the pilot reinforces the fact that the information tools and their decisions were informed. So I am going to stop there and we can address any questions.
Thank you, Denise, for that presentation. We saw a lot of positive outcomes on the slides that you just shared with us, how customers are benefiting. We heard earlier from the Brattle folks as to sort of why people leave the pilot, and oftentimes they're moving to a supplier or maybe they're moving homes and disconnecting. But I'm sure that there were some customers that just wanted to end the pilot for the sake of ending their participation in the pilot. Can you give us a flavor based on exit interviews as to why those customers chose to leave the pilot on their own?
Yes, those customers typically said that they found it more difficult to reduce their energy use than they had expected. And, surprisingly, despite the, feedback that we received in the post-pilot survey, in terms of customers saying that they did have more difficulties during COVID, those customers didn't, drop out of the pilot at that time. So they were willing to, work harder to change their behavior, or perhaps they didn't save as much as they had wanted to, but they still stayed in the pilot and achieved savings. We did see some customers leave when the pilot ended, but certainly the majority of customers stayed in the pilot.
And can I ask about that? Because the pilot officially ended May of last year, although I believe those customers could actually retain and stay on the program until April of this year. When the pilot ended, were those customers notified that you could either stay on or leave, and some decided to check a box and leave? Is that how it worked?
Yes. Customers were notified that the pilot was ending and that they would receive their final survey, and we explained how they could leave the pilot rate if they desired.
Okay, that is helpful. Obviously, some customers, a good number of customers, it looks like, decided to stay on. And if the commission takes no action before April of 2022, those customers, are they simply returned to default SOS service? Or they're on SOS service, so they're just removed from the pilot?
Chairman Stanek, this is Michael Norman from PHI. Yes, right now we have it configured in our systems that they would automatically migrate to the residential service classification at that time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Norman. I'll turn to my colleagues.
I have a kind of follow-up question to that, Mr. Chairman. And maybe Ms. Null or Mr. Littell can weigh in on this. Do we expect the utilities to make filings as a result of this pilot? What is the work group's kind of course between now and April? Give us a high level overview of the decisions we have to make between now and then, if we decide to make take any action, and what's kind of the general timeline for that? Because, well, the window's closing pretty quickly.
Certainly, Your Honor. In the notice for this hearing, the commission did include a footnote that customers could remain on this rate pending final commission action on consideration of a full-scale rollout. So if the utilities elect to, they can continue customers on that rate until this commission acts. That gives you all a little additional breathing room through April. Our hope had been that we would have a proposal at this hearing, but when we went within the work group and we asked the utilities for kind of the large picture of how they would do a rollout, they were looking at some additional hours, some changes to the on and off peak periods, and that then opened a larger discussion with the stakeholders about why are you making these changes? What additional data do we need? How has COVID changed what peaking looks like on your systems? And so now the parties are exchanging information about what elements of the system are peaking in what hours, how stressful are those peaks, how do we really justify a full deployment of this rate. I think at the initial pilot design stage, everyone was willing to accept a little bit of wiggle room because it was a limited pilot. There were going to be few people in it. If there were unintended cost shifts, that was acceptable for what we were going to learn. And so people are digging in a little bit further now. The information exchange is ongoing. My hope is that everyone will have what they need by the end of this month, and then we'll reconvene the work group to look at what the utilities have proposed. We'll likely give other parties an opportunity to make new proposals if they have them based on that information. But I can say that a lot of the peripheral items, how we'll treat these in rate cases, will this be a separate class? A lot of those have been quite easily resolved. So my hope is that once we have the broad contours of the design, we'll be able to bring that to the commission with very little controversy.
I heard Ms. Senecal say something very different than what you said. So I think Ms. Senecal, if I'm characterizing this correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think she said, based on the response to the chairman's question, that in April, the customers will be removed from the pilot. But you said we issued, and I know that's originally the way it was, we issued a subsequent order. Is that what I'm hearing, that said they could stay on until we took some action? The
notice for this hearing, knowing that we were going to have to, work within the work group and that the pilot has been as kind of encouraging as it was, there was a footnote that indicated that customers could stay on the rate until the commission engaged in a final action. If the utilities need to file updates to their tariffs, I think that could happen. Excuse me 1 second. My child is banging down the door. David Littell, do you mind jumping in very quickly?
Sure, I'll just jump in here. I think we should ask for clarification from the utilities, but Molly and ours understanding was that the order that was issued is what Molly just articulated, is that the people could stay on the rates to stay on that topic. I had another comment on the related topic in a second, but want to make sure we nail this one.
So does the footnote in the notice kind of countermand the original structure of the pilot, where we actually issued a formal order that said they come off in April?
Well, the notice, Commissioner, was issued at the direction of the commission. Footnote 1 simply states that the customers can remain on the current pilot program until such time that the commission issues an order in this docket.
I mean, I'm okay with that. I just wanted to make sure I understood what we were doing here. So, okay.
Your Honors, there may be a difference between BGE and PHI on this matter. So, with BGE, our tariff language does suggest, or does say that, we state the April 1st date, but we then say that, it continues basically until the commission, acts on it. So, BGE believes that we can continue the rates until the commission takes, whatever action. And that's how we've communicated it to customers. It may be that PHI is a little different.
And Commissioner O'Donnell, again, this is Michael Norman from PHI. In our tariffs, it states that the rate effective date will be until April 1, 2022. So I think we would need to make a filing to adjust that date as stated in our tariffs.
I hate to doom it, but it seems like it'd be a rather simple tariff change to make that happen, to put you in the same posture as BG&E.
Yeah, and I think we can definitely towards that to get that resolved.
All right. Well, my general thoughts, Mr. Chairman, are such a glowing report here today on the results of this pilot. I think indicate to us that we should consider, after we deliberate a little bit, applying these learnings to a more broader rollout and application. That's just my initial thoughts.
So I had a question for BGE. Did you notice any differences between BGE and PHI in light of the fact that some of the customers in the pilot, and I guess I need to confirm this, that some of the customers in the pilot were gas customers too? So did that change their ability to monitor their and moderate their usage during the winter months as opposed to the all-electric customers with PHI?
This is Lynn. We have not looked in detail at that, especially across the utilities. I will say that of the BGE participants, just under 50% of them have electric heating source. So it's about a 50-50 split of our participants with electric heating versus another source of heating. So it definitely would have an impact on the amount of load that a customer had the ability to shift in the winter months for about half of our participants.
Okay, so then within BGE itself, then I guess you have your own mini pilot there. You could, to the extent you wanted to or needed to, there's at least some data you could go through to try and see if there's a distinguishing component there. And I don't know that there is. I'm just curious about it.
Yes, and I don't believe we looked at that particular subgroup as part of the Brattle analysis, so I don't have any conclusive results to share with you today about that.
Okay, thank you. I just have one other.
It's a really good question.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's a really good question. We didn't design the pilot to specifically look at that. If the commission wanted, we could ask Brattle if they can, but I don't know if the data set is sufficient to analyze it. In retrospect, it might be, as Lynn indicated, they have the data, at least for BG&E. But it's not clear to me which way that cuts, whether they have more ability to do it or less ability to do it because their load is lower.
So just one other question, picking up on some of the questions raised earlier about customers that may elect to remain on the pilot pending some further or future commission action. What's it going to look like for them? Are they going to receive all of the same bill messages and emails and other resources that they received during the pilot until such time as the commission takes an action, or some of the pilot benefits, I'll just call them that they received during the pilot, are those going to elapse if suppose 60% of the customers decide to leave, just as an example?
Commissioner Linton, this is Michael Norman again for PHI. I think in terms of the ongoing efforts, we're still discussing that with the work group, but the website and the tool for customers to see their savings, we're thinking would be available. But I think in terms of the ongoing outreach, that's something we're still discussing at this time. And anyone else that wants to weigh in on that.
Yes, this is Denise again. We are still sending out notifications to customers through email in terms of when the, seasonal changes occur. So they're still getting the information that they need.
Okay, so it's fair to say then that there may be some differences. We don't know exactly what, but there may be some differences between the customer's experience on the pilot pre-report as opposed to post-report until the commission takes additional action. Is that fair to say?
Yes, again, this is Michael. Yes, I believe that's fair to say.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's all I had.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a few questions?
Commissioner Richard, yes, please.
Great, thank you. Yeah, great presentation. I wanted to ask, I guess starting, I understand that the work group at this point wants to go back and look at marketing, but also look at just overall program design. I took notice that one of the issues that customers had was there was some confusion as to why the peak hours in the wintertime were in the morning. I'm interested to know, is there any correlation between that and attrition? And that just comes to mind because that's, again, a moment of the day when there's a lot of flurry of activity. People are getting up and turning on lights and turning up the heat and probably turning on hair dryers. Is that an issue at all with, even though it's a small segment of the attrition, but was that a problem, a bigger problem that we should be concerned about, and as far as program design?
This is Denise. I don't think that is the issue. As we saw in the survey results, customers said it was actually easier to save energy during the peak hours in the morning than it was, around dinner time. And, my recollection is that we had more attrition during the summer than in the winter.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that for me. I just had taken note that you had put that on your presentation about the confusion during the winter hours. I'm interested to know from the utility standpoint, has there been an attempt to try to get our arms around the system savings? I know there are savings, and that's good to see that there are savings to the customer, but is there a way, as we look at overall the benefits of time of use, to see if we can quantify the system benefits? And I know that's difficult because these are expenses that won't occur, but is there anything that might inform us as far as time of use benefits?
Commissioner Richard, this is Michael Norman again. That is a challenge because for, a particular feeder that may serve, 1,000 customers with the pilot levels right now, there may only be, a handful of customers, 10 customers on an individual feeder. So it's hard to get impacts on load on those feeders that are meaningful at this point in time. I think we're thinking probably they would have more impact on future capital spending in the long run. And it's hard to kind of discern like O&M savings immediately, especially with the levels of customers on individual feeders.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, it's just discussed that there's a theoretical savings. I'm just interested to know if we can, at some point, get our arms around what the actual quantifiable savings are.
Commissioner Richard, this is Beverly Sikora for BGE. I'll also add that, I think while this was a 2-year study, I think our folks would want more experience. As Dr. GC said, we didn't experience perhaps the not the attrition, but kind of the people getting used to it and maybe not continuing on. Before we would be comfortable deferring capital investments to make sure that we are able to meet peak load. I think we'd want more certainty and more experience that that customers would be maintaining the usage shift during, from peak hours to off peak hours, because the last thing we would want is, to make a significant, deferral of capital investment, not do something, and then find out that, oh, this was, somewhat temporary, that customers decided, it wasn't worth their time. So, I think something definitely for the future, but, something that we need more time and experience to look at.
Okay, well, fair enough. And then finally, this is sort of off the wall, but for OPC, Mr. Fields, I see you're monitoring. If you don't have an answer, that's fine. But given the overall success and the popularity, or I guess the acceptance of this program, any impressions on whether or not an opt-out approach to future offering on time of use rates? Just again, it's kind of out of the blue, but again, it seems like there could be a lot of benefits to time of use rates, and so I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon. William Fields for the Office of People's Counsel. I can't give you an office position on that. We are certainly participating in this work group and looking at these benefits. I think there are concerns that come along with that, because there are customers that have less of an ability to modify their load usage, whether it's medical or other reasons, and we want to be mindful of that. And as was stated early, we are taking a close look at the cost allocation between off-peak rates and on-peak rates that were embedded into these pilot rates, to take another look to see if those are really appropriate. And there's been good work and discussion in the work group about that. So, Commissioner, it's a very good question. We're certainly thinking about how to get more participation if these rates are beneficial to customers, provided that they're customers are saving money. If you have the cost allocation right, then it's a good thing that they're saving money. If you don't have the cost allocation right, well, then it's a concern that you're shifting costs and not really reflecting a proper shifting costs without really properly reflecting the system. So I apologize, a bit of a rambling answer, but it's something that we're working on.
No, thank you very much, and I appreciate your answering the question. Just again, when you're actually part of the program here, but thank you. That was informative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's apparent that these results are encouraging. We've come a long way since the time varying rates back from the 1970s and the 1980s, when people participated in these programs, but not for very long, because they recognized they had to do their dishes or their laundry at midnight, and hence a very high attrition rate. We see some of those concerns continue to this day, as Ms. Senecal briefly mentioned, but customers have a lot more tools than they did just even from a few years ago. And I'm hopeful that these savings will incentivize increased participation in the program, both direct savings to the customers that participate, but to broader savings to all ratepayers, whether or not they participate, in terms of perhaps peak shaving and not requiring the build out of additional capital infrastructure across the distribution grid. Ms. Knoll, I will ask you to help us out in terms of where we would go forward from here. Does the work group need additional time to provide the commission with consensus recommendations?
Yes, Your Honor. The work group is still looking at what a full-scale rollout would look like. We also, I forgot to mention this earlier, we designed the rates to be common across all three utilities, but the system needs of all three utilities aren't the same. So again, as we're looking at this full-scale rollout, modifying this to be responsive to the realities of each utility system as well. I think we'll know in the next month or so precisely how much time we need. I couldn't give you an estimate that I was confident we wouldn't need to push back at today's hearing. But I can promise you that we are still working and that there is the intention amongst all of the parties to bring a proposal to the commission, with all due haste, as long as we can, keep the conversation, everything moving. No one in the work group, I think I can say this confidently, is kind of dragging their feet or being uncooperative or in opposition to bringing this to you all. So I don't know that we need any commission action to move the ball forward at this point.
Okay, so no request of the commission or no vote of the commission is being asked for by the work group at this point in time. Can you venture a guess as to when the commission will receive a product by the work group?
My hope would be by mid-April.
Okay. If the work group cannot provide an update by, let's say, tax day, April 15th, if you could, as you and Mr. Littell, as the work group leaders, could provide the commission with an update as to where you stand and when you intend to file.
Absolutely, Your Honor.
Thank you. Well, before we conclude today's hearing, let me ask any of the other parties if they disagree with what Ms. Knoll just said. And I'll take silence as acquiescence. Okay, well, I'd like to thank, obviously, the Brattle team for their analysis of this 2-year pilot, all of our participating utilities who have spent a lot of time and ratepayer dollars crafting this pilot so that it would yield benefits. My one concern and takeaway is that if the commission were to design a program that is long-lived and going forward, we'll need to do a better job up front in terms of marketing and selling this program to customers. We obviously had a very small sample size, and in some cases, in some seasons, we saw that it yielded non-statistically significant results. And hopefully with a larger public offering, we'll have actual data that we could use to the benefit of all ratepayers. So with that, we will conclude the presentation and this hearing. We are now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.